We've reached the end of our first show, unbelievably. And so, again, that was fast. That was really fast, actually. And so that was a blast. But before we close, I wanted to answer a very important question, one that all of you probably have in some form or another at this point in the program after you watched all the things that we've talked about so far. Kind of went all over the place. First episode doing something like this. And I think it's important to answer. So what is the show actually going to be about? I think that's a really good thing to get straight. That's a very good question, as I mentioned earlier, and I thought it was pertinent to answer it as clearly and concisely as possible before we just kind of, wipe our hands and move on to next week. And to answer that question, I'm going to draw from Steve Deace, the famous cultural commentator for Blaze Media, and one that I look up to quite fondly. I was just actually turned on to Steve's content recently, and he's awesome. He's really, really good. He says a lot of really good things. And on January 22nd of this year, Steve Deace was invited to preach at Mark Driscoll's Real Men in Scottsdale, Arizona. Driscoll, who had helped bring Deace out of the lowest point of his life, correctly labeled him as one of the most important Protestant commentators in America for evangelical Christians, as, he is, undoubtedly. And this is proven through Deace's talk, because the theme of his sermon at Real Men, an incredibly important institution and maybe the only Christian institution, as sad as that is to say, that focuses on building up men, was decision-making. What makes a man today? What type of man should be made today? How should men wander throughout life? These are all really important questions, and ones that are absolutely necessary to have strict answers to. The reason why Deace's speech was so good was because he answered all of those questions with one answer. Deace's anchor that he chose to moor to his boat, the one that defined his talk and defines his life philosophy, will also define this show. Your worldview. The thing that made Deace's speech ring so true with so many people is this answer. More than any other decision you make, no decision is more important than the one regarding how you choose to see the world. Unlike many lines of thought in the world today, it is indeed a choice. It is not something that can be consolidated as something as trivial as your skin color or your gender or who you decide to go home with after one more whiskey sour than you'd like to after a night on 6th Street. But something that can be consolidated into a coherent strategy and vision for your life is how you see the world. Being white, for example, has nothing to do with the way you go about living from a technical perspective, nor does being a woman or a lesbian or a Filipino non-binary demisexual, as bizarre as those people might sound and probably are. Those things all matter to some extent, and we should be careful about trivializing them, and we'll try not to on this show. But all of these things pale into comparison to your worldview. In the 6 years that I've been talking about values and digging into every fiber of how and why they matter, I believe this is the final conclusion that I've reached. The reason why the world seems to be so crazy, the reason why 2 decades of content and influencer culture has submarined nearly 2 generations of people, is because of a bad worldview. There is no reason as to why this has taken place, at least not any good ones. Instead, what we've had are a lot of very banal and stupid reasons for very deep and nuanced problems. Trump is Putin's puppet. Get the vax. Elon Musk is the president. Christianity is outdated. Corporations want the best for you. Go see a therapist if you feel sad or any emotion. Hustle and grind. Be obsessed or be average. If they have the opposite genitalia and a pulse, sleep with them. Don't do them, these banal and stupid people with their banal and stupid reasons say, and you're an outcast. Shut up and obey. I take issue with this worldview, as does the value economics movement, and as do, I would both assume and hope, a lot of you do as well. And I should also note, I'm not saying that any of those statements and so many more are inherently wrong, even though I certainly have grounded opinions on them, and I would encourage you to do so as well. What I am saying is that this posture towards these statements, this incoherent, lazy, and sloppy nonsense that we've both been fed and allowed to be fed to us, has failed us. I've stated the statistics too many times. Their collective depression has weighed me down for far too long, if I'm being honest. But the neat and skinny, what we must remember as we progress forward together is that all of these people, to a person, have had their credibility shattered. They must never be listened to again. Fool us once and you screw 2 generations, potentially for life. Fool us twice and we deserve it. So that is what this show is going to be dedicated to, providing you with a different worldview, an alternative to the slew of disjointed, failed, and lifeless ones that are thankfully sputtering out and dying on the side of the road. There is a need for a revitalization of the way people approach the biggest issues of our time, a new veneer into which to look through to actually get what we need to live a better life. The goal of this show is to provide that alternative and to fill that gap. I learned a lot of things in college, most of which were pointless and stupid. However, the smartest thing a professor ever said to me in college, ironically from a very non-smart person and professor, was to learn to question things. And boy, should we ever. There are many questions that we need to ask, many landmines we need to unearth to create this new worldview, this value-driven worldview. They've taken out too many promising people already. It would not only be a shame but a sin to let these failed tactics remain unimpeded. That worldview is broken. A new one must be fostered. At the Value Economics Show, and within the Value Economics movement, we are going to do everything in our power to create it.